The three philosophers that you chose were all fascinated with the notion of identity and what it means. And the first, Zhuangzi, said the perfect person has no identity. What did he mean by that?
So this is an interesting passage in the Chuang-Tzu, which is this ancient text going back to the 4th and 3rd century BCE, although it's probably a compilation of many texts that were added through several centuries. But this comes very early on in the text, this claim. It can be translated in various ways, but one of them is, the perfected person, the complete person, has no identity. I think to understand this, you can think about the context in which Zhuangzi was originally writing. The figure of Zhuangzhou, this author, Zhuangzi means Master Zhuang, who supposedly wrote this text, is supposed to have lived in the collapse of a great empire, the Western Zhou Empire, which controlled a lot of what is now central China. And because of this collapse, there were philosophers like Confucius who thought the great danger here is that people have lost their sense of who they are. But he didn't mean in our modern individualist sense where, you have a particular self and I have a particular self. He meant people had lost their sense of their social roles. Fathers were not acting like fathers. Lords were not acting like lords. Mothers were not acting like mothers. The theory of identity that you seem to find in Confucius is one of emulation of examples. What people are supposed to do is define themselves by finding an exemplary figure and being as much like that exemplary figure as possible. You have this all through Confucian tradition. In the Han Dynasty, you have these compilations there's one that's a book of exemplary women, just a kind of manual that you can choose which role you're in, and then you emulate this particular legendary figure as closely as possible. So there was no sense of individual identity, of, your true self, this romantic idea that we have now. Now, Zhuangzi is very resistant to this Confucian idea of identity, but he doesn't oppose it with a individualist notion like ours. Instead, he says we should try to get outside of the idea of identity altogether. It's not that instead of trying to be like one of these great exemplars or trying to be like the ideal version of your social role, you should instead try to be like your true self. The Taoist scholar Brooks Ziporin says, to convey this idea, it's just as dangerous to try to be like yourself as it is to try to be like someone else. And so you have this very strange idea in the Chuang-Tzu that you should not be trying to be like anyone or anything.
See, it's interesting this because Spinoza, your second philosopher, he also argued that we derive our sense of self from imitation. And this is interesting from him because he was living in a time when everyone was a member of a church of some sort, except him, which sort of feels like he was sort of striking out alone and wasn't deriving a sense of himself from imitation. But you go into this in quite a lot of detail in your book about how really all we are doing when we are saying, oh, this is who I am, is you're just copying someone else.
Yes, unconsciously. All three of the figures who I look at were outsiders, really kind of radical outsiders in some way. And Spinoza is the ultimate outsider. As you say, he's possibly the only person in Western Europe at that time who is not officially a member of any confessional religious organization. It's a kind of bureaucratic anomaly that he's allowed to be in this position. So he's thrown out of the Jewish synagogue at a young age, and he is interested in these various non-conforming Christian sects, but he never joins any of them. And somehow he gets away with this, which is very unusual at the time. So confessional affiliation was the quintessential form of identity at this time. People, would reach naturally for that as the answer to who am I? Who am I? I am a Catholic. I am a Arminian Reformed Calvinist, something like this.
Yeah.
But what Spinoza sees is that even at the individual level, we have to get our idea of ourselves from somewhere. And Spinoza says we can't possibly get it from introspection. Spinoza says you can't look into yourself and see what you really are there. He says that, in his way, he puts it this way. He says the only knowledge that the mind has of the body, or the mind has of itself, is the effects of other things upon it. Now, Spinoza, I think, he has this strange theory of emulation. Emulation, he says, is the desire for something which occurs in us only because we perceive someone else to have that desire. Why should we want something because somebody else wants it? Well, I think it's because, for Spinoza, we only get a notion of ourself by looking to others. Others somehow seem to us, think back to your teenage years, other people sort of seem to be definite. They seem to have these kind of identities. They appear to have already settled into being, whatever they are, goths or jocks or, whatever. These kind of, when you look at yourself, you don't feel that. You feel this tremendous uncertainty and anxiety about what you are. And so somehow you end up emulating, whether it's conscious or not, just as a way to try to answer the question that's tormenting you about who you are.